Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to the session on AI in early warning and early action, successes, challenges, and future pathways. My name is Angelica Lindqvist-McGowan, and I work as Operations and Outreach Manager for the VIEWS team, the Violence and Impact Early Warning System that is co-hosted by PRIO and Uppsala University. And today, it is my distinct honor to serve as moderator for this panel alongside 4 distinguished panelists from a variety of organizations that are currently exploring the use of AI for early warning and early action. Now with me on the panel, we have Myhre, project manager for the DEEP project at the Danish Refugee Council, Barrett, Deputy Bureau Chief Data Officer, very long title, from the US Department of State and also former PRIO-ite. We have Geraldine Henningsen, from data scientist from the UNHCR, and Hilde Haug from the Conflict Prevention Center at the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, you all find yourselves at rather different stages of this journey and in quite distinct roles. So I, for one, am really excited to learn more about your work and in particular to hear more on your thoughts on the challenges that we need to overcome to move from early warning to early action. So to get us started, I'd like to invite each of you to take about 5 minutes each to reflect first on what early warning tools or methods that your team, center, or broader organization currently employs to predict, prepare for, or prevent conflict and humanitarian crisis, if that falls within your mandates, and to what role AI and data-driven techniques play in these efforts. Who would like to go first? You want to start, Joel?
I might as well. So again, greetings, and I'm going to have to lead off knowing it, and thank you so much for the moderating and the great panelists, because we were all catching up before. And I want to thank the colleagues that coordinated this event, because it's great to be back in Oslo. Again, I'm Myhre, again, working with the Danish Refugee Council, but the Data Entry and Exploration Platform, the DEEP platform, is a consortium. Again, thank you to our colleagues that give us governance. I'll speak more about that. And of course, that's the IFRC, UNOCHA, IDMC, other partners. And I always say it takes a village, or of course, I just spent the last 5 years in Hawaii, so I'll say an ohana. I might end up this session by just saying aloha, because I really want to make this a dialogue. And of course, we have such great thought leaders on stage, and some of my great friends and mentors that are in. Again, thank you, Branka, and other colleagues. It was very inspiring to ask the hard questions. But, you know, we at the, again, DEEP platform, we endeavor to tackle one of the biggest problems coming out of, again, the Nepal earthquake, where I was then working at NetHope. We were trying to tackle qualitative data. And in a radical way, there's a lot of great tools that you can buy, you pay subscriptions. But being an American, I always want to say, I have a dream. And imagine if you had open source tools. Imagine if you could open up the data. Thank you to Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, all the colleagues, again, to ACLED and other colleagues who have great data. As I always say, they're kind of data supplies coming into this kitchen. Well, we at the DEEP platform allow you, any of you, and of course, the work starts tomorrow. We want to get you using our open source platform. You'll be joining 8,000 humanitarians. Thank you to the Bureau for Humanitarian Affairs, USAID, who's been supporting us, and other partners, US CDC, and again, the world's biggest humanitarian organizations, IFRC, to get the right tools to the right people with the right data to make decisions during crises. But over the course of this panel, I want to talk about, you know, we all tend to be kind of reactionary. And of course, I'm the only non-doctor in my family. My family are all physicians, and a lot of them are emergency doctors. But, you know, American public health notwithstanding, we also want to do preventative health. And I think this, thank you to the Secretary General, early warning for all. My previous incarnation was at the Pacific Disaster Center, winner of the Sasakawa Award, and the idea of building resilience. And so I'd like to talk also about conflicts do not happen in a vacuum, and also the idea they're going to be in an area of a lot of other hazards and a lot of other data, and that data on displacement. All of us have been refugees or immigrants or displaced. I think we need to all own that, and that's why it's such an honor to be here. But thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Geraldine, would you like to go next?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the invitation, and thanks, Angela, for setting up this session. My name is Geraldine Henningsen. I'm from UNHCR. We are a very small team of 6 people in the HQ in Copenhagen, in the Global Data Service, and work with data science. And when Angela asked me to join this panel, my first reaction was, "Oh, I don't know nothing about this." but then I actually thought about what kind of the implication of early warning systems, and I would say that we as an organization are kind of at the beginning of the development of early warning systems. That does not mean that UNHCR doesn't have any tools yet. Of course, we do. We have to. They will mainly be preparatory, so I wouldn't necessarily say that we have reached the stage of anticipatory action, but of course there is a lot of work going into being into preparedness, expecting, seeing crises at an early stage and being able to react to it. I think UNHCR uses a considerable amount of resources on this topic. So we have risk colleagues who are regionally placed, who do a lot of assessment, which is, from my understanding, mainly qualitative. We have our Department of Emergency and Disaster Preparedness, who are constantly monitoring. They probably will kill me for saying that, but I don't know how many indicators, and which then pick up quite early on these things to send out signals that, hey, look, there's a crisis looming here, or actually even ongoing. But then apart from this, as you are interested in AI, we as a team have begun working on AI-based early warning systems in prolongation of our general AI work, which is more geared towards population statistics, because that's the focus of our team. And we started in 21 as a team, and we also immediately actually jumped into the early warning realm. We have a very small team, as I said before, we only 6 people, and a fraction of those work on early warning systems. But what I could say is that we have currently 2 main products, which are mainly risk-based, so where we try to estimate the risk of displacement at the country level for different thresholds. This has been more or less completed. It's a monthly risk index that is sent out. And then we have a newer project, which is with CRAFT, where we got generous funding from CRAFT, which is going down to the subnational level, where we try to estimate risk indices at the subnational level, actually at the 0.5 grid level, which around the equator equates to around 55 times 55 kilometers. So you can see there's a really high resolution on this. And this work is particularly geared towards climate change displacement, or actually, you cannot really say that climate in with the like predicting displacement risk with a special focus on climate change, because we cannot establish any causality in this regard. So these are the 2 tools that we currently have, and then the UNHCR has been very gracefully bestowed a 2 million euro grant from the government of Luxembourg to build a larger early warning system, because what we think so far, what we have done, early warning risks or risk assessments, we wouldn't necessarily call this an early warning system, because it is very much geared towards predicting quantitative risk. But in our view, early warning system is something that is more comprehensive. It would probably also include flagging mechanisms within the decision-making process, as was discussed in the previous session. So this is what we do is one tiny step in the whole system process that we try to build.
Thank you so much. Great. Would you like to go next?
Thanks so much, Angelica, and to the PRIO team. As you mentioned, I'm a PRIOite, so I'm very happy to be back here. And thanks so much to my co-panelists as well. This is a real opportunity to speak with some mentors and real leaders in the field. So I'm Greg Barrett. I'm a team lead and Deputy Bureau Chief Data Officer for the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. I've been in the department for around 5.5, 6 years. I'm in the Office of Advanced Analytics, which does things that are very germane to our talk here. We are a team of about 15 to 20 data scientists, quantitative social science researchers, and folks who are basically at the vanguard of trying to turn these data sets that are produced into something that policymakers can use, whether that's talking points, dashboards, or other analytical tools. Another part of my work, which is highly related, is managing something called the Instability Monitoring and Analysis Platform, or IMAP, which is an internal hub that we have that we started in 2019, basically to make sure that these data sets and these products that we produce using conflict data and social science data don't just kind of end up on a dusty SharePoint somewhere, but they are actually integrated into the community, not just the 75,000 employees of the U.S. Department of State, but also what we call the interagency. So our colleagues at the U.S. Agency for International Development, Department of Defense, National Security Council, sort of all across the U.S. government. And that may not sound like a huge achievement, but getting these systems to talk to one another and just being able to have common access is a big win. And particularly doing so on issues of substantive and normative importance, such as conflict early warning, is critical. And Geraldine already mentioned something called CRAFT, the Complex Risk Analytics Fund. I'm the main point of contact in the U.S. government for that. Have been involved in CRAFT since about 2020. Since the start of that, what CRAFT is a multi-donor trust fund instrument housed in the UN, in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. And basically, it's also a way to bring together major donors in this space: Germany, UK, Netherlands, the US, including our partners at USAID, BHA, to say we should stop, paying for these different data sets out of different pots on different timelines and with differently aligned schedules and norms. We should come together through a single instrument, which will provide regularity of funding, which will provide benefits of a data ecosystem, and help these data providers talk to one another and knit these various initiatives together in a way that makes sense and benefits all of us. So it helps the data providers in the sense that there's regularity of funding. They understand cohesively what the major players, or many of the major players in the donor community want. And we can have a single unified operating picture that understands the entire landscape of data and early warning.
Thank you so much. VIEWS is actually also one of the recipients of the CRAFT funding, along with several other organizations here in the room today. So we're all very grateful for that contribution. Hilde, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you very much. And also, again, thanks for the invitation. I also feel a little bit like a fish out of water here, I think, when you invited me, but I think I've been reassured by some of the conversations I've had here. And so I work in the Conflict Prevention Center of the OSCE in Vienna. And I work as a senior operational support officer and working specifically with some of the what we call the conflict cycle toolbox, including then early warning, which is part of that. So I wanted to actually start a little bit saying about our mandate and what we do before, and then leading into kind of how we use the text, because I think it also shows some of the kind of limitations we might have. And I think, starting as Geraldine, we have a kind of more comprehensive concept of security. So we are a security organization under a regional security organization under Chapter 8 of the UN Charter. So we are like the largest kind of security operation and corporation in the world, and we cover mostly the Northern Hemisphere. And it was established specifically as a kind of platform for dialogue, particularly East-West. And this is also some of the challenges we are facing today with the kind of relations that we see now. We have a multi-dimensional concept of security, where we consider 3 different concepts of security, from political, military, economic, and so on, environmental issues, and also human dimension issues, kind of as all part of one, where both of them are kind of seen as complementary, interconnected, and equally important and interdependent. So when it comes to early warning, I think it's an organization-wide objective for the OSCE, and it's enshrined in various declarations that go back to the 1992 Helsinki document, Budapest in 94, and for us, maybe the key document that we rely on is what we call the 2001 Ministerial Council decision on the kind of elements on the conflict cycle, because it also assigned a few kind of specific responsibilities on early warning to our office. So the Secretary General of the OSCE was then assigned a mandate to provide early warning to participating states on emerging crises and conflicts in the OSCE area, and also to consolidate the kind of early warning methodology in capacities in a methodological, systematic, comprehensive, cross-dimensional manner. And in my office, we were assigned a role as kind of early warning focal point, and we also have a number of focal points in all the field operations that we have. So that's kind of like the background of where we are. And I think in many ways also I think the discussions I kind of had here also shows that I think when we talk about early warning, we talk slightly about different things. So we are not so much dealing with the kind of big kind of prediction models, because it's also, provide. It's more about also providing information to our leadership in terms of what we, that there is a rising crisis, and then it's actually not even up to the Secretary General doesn't have a mandate to act, but she will then alert the states who are the ones who then have the possibility to use the tools that we have. We are facing a number of issues, and I just wanted to mention the mandate issue just to make it clear kind of where we are. That has impact also when it comes to the use of technology. So one is that we are a consensus-based organization, which means that most of the decisions has to be made by all the 57 states. And this is quite difficult these days. And most of the tools that we have for conflict prevention, including early warning, do require kind of like a decision in the Permanent Council, which means that all the states have to agree. This is not really happening these days, and I can maybe take one example, which was we had a big mission in Ukraine, the special monitoring mission, with over 1,000 people, and also a lot of different tools that we used, including UAVs and cameras and all these other instruments. And when in 2022, then we actually, their mandate came up in March of that year, so just after the war escalated in Ukraine. And one of our states decided to put down a veto, and it meant that we had to close down the whole mission. So we kind of the presence we had was actually, that was kind of maybe one of our stronger tools that we have. I think this secondly, I just wanted to say that a lot of our approach to early warning collection collation analysis is quite decentralized because we have a number of different kind of entities, and it's a bit of a complicated system. And I think this is also in keeping with the kind of political and evolved nature of the organization. Because we have a lot of both official and unofficial ways of sharing information when it comes to early warning also and related info. And I think there's only to these kind of constraints that are related to mandate, political issues, and also resources, which is another big issue for us. We are using the kind of the formal early warning tools quite carefully. I think we've only actually had 3 formal early warnings issued by the Secretary General so far. But there is a lot of kind of informal information sharing going on. So just maybe just to jump to like some meetings point where when it comes to kind of using new innovation, I have to say we are kind of very, as you mentioned, quite at the kind of early stage, this exploring, and I see compared to, for example, the UN has got much further, I think, than we have in that sense. But I think like many other organizations, we are trying to kind of look at the challenges that it poses for us. So I think like just wanted to mention, we haven't really had the kind of broad discussion on the kind of impact of AI on security, because of course we are a security organization. But I think we have been looking at some implications of, AI. I think they're becoming more pronounced. So we have started to see a bit of movement. So maybe start with the latest. We had this summer, our leadership issued like a policy document now on the kind of acceptable use of Gen AI technology. And I think it's, in many ways, it's focusing a lot on the risks to the OSCE and the staff by using it. But I think I see a more positive trend where it's, I mean, back in like earlier this year, we were basically told you cannot use some of these tools at work. And now they are looking more at how we can use them and some of the risks and also some of the possibilities. So I see a shift there. There's kind of more kind of acceptance that you can do this. When it comes to kind of issues where we have been involved, I think it's mostly been relating to kind of understanding and mitigating the impact of freedom of expression on media pluralism to combat kind of online hatred. But also, I think some activities in the field of kind of border security, online exploitation of children, and combating of trafficking in human beings. And I think one initiative, I think some like Howard has some, I think also has been involved in helping to develop some of this tool when it comes to the representative of the freedom of the media, who has actually launched this platform and also like a report looking at this kind of artificial intelligence and freedom of expression. So so that's kind of one initiative. I think when it comes to early warning, We have also had a project recently, which I think also we have been working a little bit with your office on the setting up as what we call OGIS, which is the OSCE Geospatial Information System project. So maybe I can talk a little bit more about this later, not to take too much of the time now. But I think we've been trying to kind of to exploring opportunities for having a bit more technological innovation, and also to enhance our situational awareness and conflict analysis, including also early warning. And I think in these applications, it will also likely provide us opportunity to test the application of GIS-linked AI tools to further kind of strengthen technology. So just my last point is, sorry to take a lot of time, is that I think that basically for us it's still very much an issue also of a political decision. So that's why also I think you see some kind of caution still at our end, because the other issues, also the issue of governance and making sure that we understand. I think we need to understand these tools a little bit better before we can kind of larger scale implement them. But we are exploring them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think it's really important also to raise that there are so many more obstacles to using early warning for early action than just looking at the models themselves. Because approaching this from the model development side, we of course look closely at what we are actually developing and how we can improve our model. But even with a perfect model at hand that predicts exactly what it sets out to achieve, and with perfect accuracy, perfect precision, there are so many other obstacles that might hinder it from actually getting used. And I would like to come back to those political sensitivities later on. But first, I was hoping we can put all of those aside and look only at the models itself, and looking at what the ideal model would be within the remits of the mandates of each of your organizations, of course. So if you basically had free hands to design a perfect model for early warning and early action for your organizations, what would that model do? What would it look like? What would you need from such a model to be able to actually use it for early warning and early action? Very open question. So approach that from any perspective you would like, from transparency to performance to specific functions. Anyone eager to go first? Yeah, go ahead.
I would lead off in a qualification. The DEEP platform, its secretariat is at the Danish Refugee Council. But, Alexander Sherum and our colleagues who do their foresight model, the idea of not only knowing where conflict happens, but where is displacement. And of course, we're very happy. I wasn't putting words in people's mouths, but thank you for mentioning governance, because we're so happy at the DEEP platform. Is it cool technology, to use a very technical term? I am from California, you might have heard from the accent. We're very excited about it. We're also excited about our next incarnation being an old surfer. Of course, it's called JAWS, the Joint Analytical Workspace. So we weren't happy just tackling qualitative data. And of course, the work starts, again, later this week. And on Monday, we're going to brief OSCE on how do you use this. 6,000 people are already using it. Our team is on the lake in Geneva right now, working with the UNDAC ANA cell. How do we prepare for the next catastrophe? But I do think radical openness. Make sure your models, you can go on. Of course, I'm not an AI engineer, but we have a lot of good ones. Thank you to Data Friendly Space, our technology partner, and all of our governance partners. Make sure it's radically open. If you can open the data, and also with due deference to places with conflicts, you can go into our platform and say, I would like to have a shared space, or I'd like to actually have a workspace that is only just us, and it isn't. It's, of course, it could be dealing with human rights, whether it's Sudan or Myanmar. We're very cognizant of that. Even our partners that I've worked with for years at ESRI, we knew that ArcGIS Online, when we were all at the meeting in Geneva, when the Ukraine crisis had accelerated a few years ago, mindful beginning 2014 and beyond, having private workspaces was key. So it's that teeter-totter as an old information manager, getting the right data to the right people at the right time to make the right decision. But always, and I'm going to paraphrase my good buddy Rakesh, who works at USAID, do no harm. So humanitarians first. So don't open the data, and then be careful of people. Be careful of people coming from California that are technologists. That's why I'm so happy to work at the humanitarian space of standards first. My boss, Katrine Staudup, getting IASC, the Interagency Standing Committee, saying, what are our data standards for protecting those in harm's way? We are part of the protection cluster. So again, protection first. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap. Open up the data, that's great. HDX, the Humanitarian Data Exchange, thank you to Dr. Javier Terán and other partners. So you can see these pieces of, I always say, the soup that we'd like to make, And we do thank those, whether it's NORAD or other partners, CRAFT, BHA, and all of the Scandinavian donors and the foundations sustaining, and also, as my dear friend Phil Veltsos from WHO, where I used to work, not doing pilot-itis, which sounds like an affliction, but not doing, technologists can often be kind of crows. We all like shiny things. What's the new AI-driven Bitcoin drone that's going to make your coffee? But how do we sustain it and exercise it? So I'm very proud that, we at the DEEP platform, we exercise and use it at the biggest exercises. And in my previous incarnation at the Pacific Disaster Center, disaster aware, you can use it. People use it for the last 20 years, and we use it in exercises before the big game. Use it in a scenario, but because you don't want to be building the tools in the middle of a big catastrophe, whether it was Nepal or Ebola, other places where I was working on those responses. So that's it. Again, standards, open data, transparent algorithms. And so those are some of my little I have a dream speech, but over to the colleagues.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on what makes a good model before I follow up with Joel on that?
Yeah, you can go for sure. Yeah, lots to show them with that. Is this like wave your magic wand question? Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd say a couple attributes that I think if I could wave my magic wand to make a perfect model, or something that would be really beneficial. First is, and I think Paula mentioned this in one of the previous sessions, but a measurement of uncertainty, something that tells us, how certain are we about these forecasts, about what we're looking at? Is this, black box machine learning thing, or is this like something that someone with a basic understanding of regression can understand, or even more basic than that? I think that is a key attribute that is that's really important, particularly when we're dealing with policymakers, because they don't have a lot of time and may or may not have the technical expertise to understand the things at work, and may not need an AI model when a simple regression will do, or something that's much more digestible. The second thing is, to Joel's point, of kind of, and PDC, Pacific Disaster Center, and their disaster aware platform does this well, is knitting together not just the projected impact in terms of violent deaths, fatalities, that sort of thing, but what are the knock-on effects? What does this do to forced displacement? What does this do to other kind of societal aspects? What does this do, again, magic wand, but like, what does this do to the likelihood of political transitions, or how will this affect the election next year or in 2 years? And the last thing I would say is that, just on the openness of the data side, I think, I represent the U.S. taxpayer, and we've worked really hard through CRAFT and other means to make sure that the data sets that we fund, the data sets are open, they're publicly available, and so we're very transparent about what's going in, so that we can have some understanding and estimation of what that looks like coming out on the other side.
Would anyone else like to jump in?
I can maybe, from UNHCR's perspective, which is very narrow, I think. I mean, because our mandate is to protect forcibly displaced people. So for us, the main goal of any early warning model would be to be prepared for a crisis. And I can only say what is on our wish list, and this is nothing that we're dreaming of. This is actually something that is very concrete in terms of to-do issues for us. The thing that we see in most cases is that there are different models needed depending on what type of situations you look at. I mean, in UNHCR's context, we have situations which are protracted, which are just ongoing. So you would probably need a very different model from this particular situation to something that is an acute crisis. And we can see that if we look at protracted situations, that our models do very, very well, because they're not difficult to model. Basically, past displacement is a really, really good predictor for future displacement, so there's not much to it. But the ones that really give us a headache are the acute crises ones. And I'm not sure we actually really capture them, to be honest. Or another nuance to that could be a model where you have a situation that is worsening. So you have an ongoing situation, but all of a sudden things go awry completely. So this is for us a big, big challenge. Another thing, I mean, what we're trying with CRAFT is going subnational, because we think there's more nuance to these processes than what can be modeled at a national level. So we really, really try to go subnational. We're really thankful, for example, for VIEWS' work on this regard. And then Another thing that for us is really, really important, and it maybe goes more into the direction what Hilde said. I mean, having a good predictive model is one thing. Implementing this politically is another one. And for us, one thing that really, really plays in is the capacity on the ground. So you could have, like, let's say you have a point estimate, which is super accurate. What does it tell you? It doesn't give you any idea, because you don't, I mean, unless you know where the people are actually going and you know what kind of capacities on the ground for these people to actually be taken care of. Yeah, it's just a number at this stage. So you need a whole lot of wrapping around these point estimates. So I think, as I said, initially the model is just the first step. And then the other one, that would be my magic wand. That would be a model that has the flexibility and adaptability of a data science, like a machine learning algorithm with the transparency of a OS. I mean, if I could have that, that would be like the biggest birthday present I could imagine. I know it doesn't exist, but this is a huge headache for us, because on the one hand, we want to have a high predictive quality. If we go parametric, we know we usually don't get it. But on the other hand, we have colleagues asking us, oh yeah, well, that's super interesting, the risk that you give me, but I don't actually know where this is coming from, so it's not particularly useful for me.
You mentioned a key term there that keeps popping up when we're talking about using AI-driven models for early warning and early action: transparency. And what this means varies a lot between different organizations. So I was hoping maybe you guys could take a stab at defining what transparency in a model means. What would you like to see in terms of transparency in order to feel like you can trust the model?
I can start here, even though I'm not working on the models as such, but I think from our side of things, having, we need to triangulate everything that we do and make sure that we have, I mean, I need to show also to our leadership, where does this information come from. So I think having, I think what you were mentioning also earlier, that you do have this kind of capacity to also explain things. I think that's important, that you can go back and actually track, where the sources, that would be important for us. And I think, on the other hand, we also need to link it up with other kind of sources that we have on the ground ourselves, and other open sources. So yeah, that would kind of.
I also realized I just skipped you on the first question, and I think it's maybe even more important in organizations that haven't been using too many AI solutions at this point in time. So if you were to make the investment to overcome any institutional challenges, funding challenges, or whatever obstacles there might be within the organization, and try to work with an AI model to support your early warning work, what would you like them to do?
Well,
How can they support you today?
I think, first of all, the importance would be, because again, our needs are quite specific, and I think it's the same with UNHCR, that to actually sit down with the developers to also make sure that those specific issues are kind of covered, and adapted to the needs that we have. I think, and it's like sometimes I'm not sure if I even know, what they can do, So I think I also need to learn more, and this is also for all of us, I think, who work in kind of our, I think Håvard mentioned earlier today about that not all the people who work in our business know how to use this kind of technology. So I think there's a lot of need for learning there. I think when it comes to, for me, like, one thing is because a lot of when early warning, they are focused on the kind of prediction of future events and the kind of forecasting. I think for me, what I ideally, my first wish is to actually have a way in some model which could help me to kind of collate all the information, because there's so much information. It's like, for me, it's more, what do I do with the information, and also to make sure that I have a way to kind of analyze both our own information, but then mixed with the open source information and other kind of information. And also the other thing I really need is a way of kind of doing the trend analysis, but also, of course, in that way, I think some of the existing models are helpful, but like, how can I adapt that to what we need to look at? Yeah.
Thank you. Now you mentioned explainability here, which I know
Yeah.
is a bit of a sensitive topic within a lot of the model development community. And this is for two reasons. First, that there's a difference between correlation and causation that can be quite challenging when a lot of the model developers are working with correlation-based models rather than models where you can actually get causal insights. And if you're working with prevention, of course, you want to know what you can actually do to prevent this from happening in the future. And the second is, or relates to the often perceived trade-off between performance and explainability. Often in the model development community, we talk about this trade-off. Perhaps Geraldine, would you like to take a stab at this and explain what this trade-off actually entails and what, in your experience, at least for UNHCR, is the most important factor here between
Yes.
performance and explainability?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, in our experience, what very, very often happens is that we have basically what was mentioned before, black box algorithms. So you put a lot of data into the algorithm, it does its thing, and it spits out the number, but you have very, very little insight of how it actually achieves this number. So if you would have a tree-based algorithm of some sort, you have a certain insight in what kind of decisions the tree has made and what variables actually are impacting it. But I mean, in terms of, let's say, the classic linear regression where you would have, you know, your beautiful parameters, you could see exactly which ones is impacting in which direction and in what magnitude. You don't have that clarity in these machine learning models. On the other hand, the machine learning models, they do not assume they don't assume any relationship between the variables ex ante, which makes them very, very flexible. So in the end, if you have a very complex setup, like for example, displacement due to conflict or whatever, which usually where you have relationships between the variables that are very nonlinear, they might be concave, they might be any direction, whatever, they might interact or whatever, usually the machine learning algorithms do much better than normal standard statistical parametric models. But then you have the issue with transparency. So if people come to you and say, yeah, that's all very nice and interesting, looks super cool, thank you for all of this, but I really would like to understand what, I don't know, a particular elite-driven conflict has in this setup. You won't be able to answer this question because you have your black box and the black box spit out that number and that's it. So I think that's a huge issue. And also you mentioned causality and correlation. I mean, obviously, because we work with real-world data, in most setups, we won't be able to establish any causal relationship between anything. I mean, there are models who can do that, but I mean, usually you don't apply them in the humanitarian setup. So if people come and ask us, does famine actually impact displacement? We cannot say for sure. I mean, it would be kind of, it wouldn't be a very honest approach if we told them yes, even if we said the model, we have like a feature list and we can see from the feature importance that the famine variable scores really, really high, it still does not include any causal relationship between the two. So I think this is a little bit of a culture clash to me, where you have on the one side the stats people and on the other side the people who come from a more political side, and they need to learn to talk to each other. And I think, I'm from the stats side, I think we need to learn the other language as much as they need to learn a little bit ours. I think this is a two-way street in my view.
Absolutely. And this also brings us back to some of the things that were raised earlier today about bringing together a diverse group of stakeholders early on in the model development process so that we can actually align our expectations and our requests on models so that they can be developed to actually serve the purpose that we hope that they do. Would anyone else like to take a stab at this question before I move on?
I can take a quick, just maybe 2 points. The first is that I think on the policymaking side, we face kind of two competing pressures. Like one is to have accurate models because we want to know what's happening and with whatever degree of certainty we can, and we also want to be using AI because it's here as Branka's keynote kind of laid out, and is a critical tool, and we have to be getting smart on it and using it where we can and where it's applicable. But the competing side is that explainability side, and it's not just which of these covariates explains the effect to the greatest degree. But I think from the policymaking side, it's also like so if I have varieties of democracy, some indicator from VDEM in my model, okay, what does that tell me about like the policy prescription? Like that is, that is a trade-off, but you can also take that explainability aside and say, okay, well, okay, a country's level of democracy, that affects their propensity to do what? But okay, so what's the natural policymaker outcome from that? And I think that's the way I like to think about this kind of whole issue set is one with a large degree of humility in the sense of, you know, working with our colleagues out in the field at many posts around the world and taking into account their qualitative information and other sources of information, but also saying like any solution, this is my view, but like any solution that we reach or we present to you in a dashboard or whatever form has to be, the term I like to use is a point of departure. So this tells you some sort of direction. This is what we've got from this set of data. This is the best, or pretty close to the best that we can understand. How does that augment, or how does that interact with your view on the ground or with that policymaking lens?
No, I have so many follow-up questions, but we're also running out of time, and we have to also move over to the external factors. Because even if we have this perfect model that fulfills all of your requests with this little magic wand, there's still so many other obstacles that we need to overcome in order to actually see them used for early action. And political sensitivities are one of those. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I mean, one thing I didn't mention before, which also I think I should have mentioned, which is that we have a number of field operations, and that's where we get most of our information from. And but the challenge we face is that we have also, each of them have different mandates, so not all of them have an early warning mandate. We have some that have a very clear early warning mandate, and then we have others that are project coordination officers who are actually explicitly not dealing with political reporting. So that creates a bit of an issue in terms of how we then communicate, with when it comes to early warning issues and what we can do. We see a lot of fears, maybe also from government, because we are working with our own participating states, so it's not, we are not looking at somewhere outside of it. So we have to, like all our missions and field presences have to be, they're approved by the host country, and a lot of them have a hesitancy in kind of wanting us to then look at them from an early warning side. So this is a big issue that we face. I think the other thing, as I already mentioned, is to use these tools. I think they will always ask, back to your last question about sources, where did you get this info from? So this is something we always have to be able to explain. I think, we also, of course, have, as I mentioned already, the political consensus issue. So for us, it's more kind of like providing information for them, and then it's up to the states to make a decision on whether, like we have actually we have a number of tools that states can use in all kind of phases, from early warning to kind of post-conflict. But it requires them to actually agree on using them, and so that's kind of part of the challenge. But I think also the kind of, in terms of the information flow we get, so I think a lot of our information is, as you mentioned before, is qualitative, is spread all over. We have different ways in which it is communicated. So also even having some models that will be able to capture that kind of a bit of a, I would not call it chaotic, but to call it like this kind of diversity of information that we get. And then I think the other thing is, like, in terms of, for us, it's also what do we do with it. And we have to, when you talk about the early action especially, you had a question, I think, also on this about how, the first on how this kind of, how do you move from early warning to early action when it comes to the models. But for me, the first question is like, it's not, I would not even have thought about that as my challenge. My challenge is more political, resource-based, and also the kind of the need for, having better technological solutions to do the work. But I think for us, the biggest challenge when it comes to the moving from early warning to early action is political, really. It's really to do with them, agreeing on the action. So for us, like when we talk about early warning, it's more kind of providing that kind of alert to the states, and then it's up to them to act. And at the moment, with this political situation we have now, with the participating states we have, some big countries, it's almost impossible to agree. Like, we haven't had agreement on our budget since 2021, you know. So that's kind of where we are, and it also makes it challenging to deal with the early warning side.
Yeah, of course. Have any of you experienced any similar challenges? And if so, do you by chance have any magical solution or any recommendations on how we might move forward to try and overcome these in the future? Very simple question.
Well, I would say when you say politics and, you know, the humans are always in the loop, and how do you keep them in the loop, and how do you, everything from, I'm now a graying GIS guy from a town called Redlands, California, so using a lot of, again, commercial tools, open source tools, and, you know, again, I was doing a lot of the mapping at WHO during the Ebola response. And it was also great to see partners come in and kind of, now that GeoAI is being done by Esri and other partners, but we need people to come up and step up. But I think in terms of getting that transparency, I'm so excited about, again, the HDX folks at UNOCHA. Imagine having an entire menu. I always use the restaurant analogy. I'm still envious of the previous analogy about what would you like in your car. Thank you, Dr. Simon. Always inspiring. But this idea that, you know, really knowing what's going in the soup, the ingredients, what are the recipes? You know, the famous secret ingredient. I have to, as an American, make the Coca-Cola analogy. What's really in Coke? Maybe you don't want to know. But it's the analogy of what's in there. Imagine opening up all those algorithms. So thank you to all the team at HDX, you know, Dr. Javier Turan and Leonardo Milano there in Geneva. And again, built on open source platform CCAN. We used it at the state of California, which was Drupal, and DCAN, not to be technical. We had data for 40 million Californians, and when I was doing the open data lead there. So how do we get, again, empower the people with data? So I think that's one part of it. And so that's what I think is exciting. And also, I have a good friend, she was at WHO, Dr. Giovanna, and now she's an expert in algorithmic audits. We know, and we at DEEP and with our JAWS work and other partners, you know, with data-friendly space, getting those audits and really saying what is under the hood. And then the last piece, and our good friend Heather Leeson at the IFRC, data literacy, the data playbook. It needs to be, you know, now that everyone, we want to get our kids jockeying with not only understanding what fake news is, but understanding data literacy. We want everyone to have a data component. So I think that's what's so exciting about this panel, and really learning from all of you. And thank you to those in the audience. This is a great collaborative event.
Does anyone else want to jump in on this? All right. Then before we open up to questions from the audience, you will get a chance to ask your questions. I just want to give all of you one last chance to offer any final advice, recommendations, or even requests to governments or organizations that are seeking to integrate AI into early warning for early action in the near future. Who wants to go first?
We're not good at giving advice, obviously.
All right. In that case, I think we can open up. Very positive ending note there, isn't it? Let's open up for some questions from the audience. We have about 10 minutes left. I see a question over here. Do we have a mic? Thank you.
Yes, hello. My name is Håkon Järle. I'm a senior researcher here at PRIO. I guess I have a general question for the panel. So you talk about understanding the models, etc. But let's say that you have a model that gives you a very accurate forecast. It tells you what we're going to happen. Maybe even it's able to implement policy, like this is going to happen if you do this policy. Do you really care how it works? Like if it's accurate?
I don't, but my colleagues do.
I mean, it's also knowing how do I know that yours is accurate, you know. I mean, I think that when it comes down to at our end, I think it's, there is a lot of still lack of really understanding of how the tools work. And I think that's part of the challenge that we face. I think there's a lot of interest in moving into using, you know, these tools. But I think that there is also a lot of learning to be done, both on kind of how to use them, but also on kind of understanding the implications, especially for a political or security organization, because, you know, it's not just us. We have to deal with the bigger states, and they, as you said, maybe they need to they will come and ask us, how did you get this information, you know? So, yeah, that would be from our side.
Yeah, I'd answer in a similar vein, because ultimately the people who will make those decisions or be accountable for those decisions, they need to know, because they're making decisions on behalf of hundreds of millions of people in our case, and you know they have a responsibility to those folks to have confidence and to have at least some, they don't need to like go in and read every line of code, but they need to have some level of understanding before they make a decision that affects, in the US's case, a lot of folks. Yeah.
We have a question over here as well.
Thank you. I'm Christian Ruge from Noref, and thank you for the panelists. I have a question about transparency and openness and vulnerability. Because in pre-conflict and conflict areas, information is a strategic resource. And one group's disaster is another group's sort of the strategy. And how, when you're working on this thing, how do you ensure that the open data that you provide in various shapes and forms, maps or dashboards, whatever, do not create harm for the vulnerable groups and do not sort of create additional information for those actors who actually have a strategy of either displacement or conflict on this? And I'd like to hear your views on how you reflect on this.
Thank you for that question. Again, it's that teeter-totter, somewhere, open data and innovation and AI and all of these things can be somewhere between Athens and Sparta. And really, as I said, it's always a teeter-totter of, again, that always is the holy grail. When I was doing, again, open data and more public safety in California, we had to get the right data to the right people to protect 40 million Californians, but also that, in this case, if it was pipeline data, other things, which is critical infrastructure, that can be a targeting app, of course. So I actually think one thing we're so excited at DEEP, because DEEP, again, and it starts tomorrow, type in thedeep.io. We'd like you to all start using it. We want to build the capacity because it's amazing, because it's in the cloud, encrypted end to end. If you want an open project, if I want to put everyone in there, great. If I also want to have an invisible project, that again, I was thinking of some dear colleagues that were working in South Sudan. We had a meeting this summer. The stories, these are they're not open data. This is actually protection cluster chronicling horrific human rights violations, and the ability to make sure that it's secure, and working with UNHCR and key partners to make sure that we can make those decisions and have those time slices. And then to the other side, things like the Turkey response, we worked on that. These are very long responses. If LA has the same earthquake, you're going to spend a decade recovering. What did you know when? And what kind of data did you pilot before? So I do think it's always a teeter-totter of, again, you do want to open the data, but again, it starts with that thou shalt do no harm. So that's our humanitarian mantra. But that's just from our perspective as the DEEP and with our governance, because governance is key.
Can maybe quickly, but this is an excellent point, and this is why we, for example, don't publish this data for now, because the fear is actually that if we predict a massive displacement coming from one country, neighboring countries could, in the worst case, close their borders. They could install measures that prevent people from seeking asylum in their countries, and so on and so forth. So in this case, we would clearly do harm, which is against our directive. But yeah, I agree. It is a back and forth, and it's increasingly becoming a headache as more actors churn out like similar models and make them public. UNHCR is so far standing back and watching, but yeah, I can say that internally this is discussed quite intensely at the moment. Yeah.
A question over here as well.
Thanks. I'm learning a lot, so thank you so much. This is a bit of a provocation because you're all so much in agreement, so I like to spice things up. But listening to you, and I think this has been touched upon, but I was curious to hear from, is it really understanding that the users and your stakeholders and your organizations need to understand the models, or is it more like they need to be familiar with the models? And, you mentioned regression coefficients, and then I started thinking, how many people do all these people know what a regression coefficient is? If you ask them to explain what it is, and do they know what are the caveats that come from a regression coefficient? Or is it just that they're familiar with it and then they accept it? Because I think this have very different implications. So do you think it's more understanding or familiarity? And depending on your answer, what do you think we can do to push in one direction or the other. Thank you.
Who wants to go?
Yeah, I can touch on that. No, Paula, that's a really good question. I would say familiarity. I don't need people to have a master's in data science to use our products, and nor should they. And that's not a good use of anyone's time, right? But I think that that familiarity can be built in a number of ways. I was talking with Katsiona at ACLID about trainings for how to use their data, the caveats, their methodology, and I think that doesn't mean that then all these people who we train need to be methodologists, but they need to be familiar with it, because it goes back to the accountability piece in my previous answer, because ultimately they will be accountable for the policy decisions that result from it. So they want to have at least a good understanding of what the caveats are and what's needed. In terms of increasing that familiarity, it's trainings with external partners. We do this a lot through CRAFT, and it's also the department and U.S. government more broadly have been making big strides in terms of training folks in basic like data science or data use. We've are now hiring bureau chief data officers for every bureau in the department. This is a congressional directive that came out, and so that's about building a broader kind of data culture, which I think is critical. And then the last thing, which touches on a previous question too, is that I think doing things like I'm doing now and having dialogues between the policymakers and the people who make the data and know and have such deep subject matter expertise is critical. For the first time, although we weren't able to fully participate in the process, but we had someone take part in the VIEWS forecasting competition last year. And that's building these dialogues, including through this one at PRIO, is a direction that I hope we continue to move in. And whether that's emailing me, calling me up, and saying, "Hey, can we get on a create a whiteboard and figure out what our product would look like that would be helpful to you?" We don't bite, but this dialogue between policymakers and people who do this deep data science is a step in the right direction.
I actually think that's a perfect conclusion to the event right now, and we are right on time. So I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who joined us here, both in person and over the live stream, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us here today. And please stick around for the next panel that will delve even deeper into some of the topics that we discussed now on trust and transparency in AI. Thank you so much. Thank you.